From downtown Decatur, it's the Faber Files. Hello, I'm your host, Bill Faber. Because democracy demands debate, we present this program, a program of community interests and issues relevant to the Decatur community. Tonight's program is part 2 of a conversation, a lecture, and a question and answer with Professor Wenz, Professor of Political Science at the University of Illinois. His topic is Beyond the Red and the Blue, the 12 political philosophies and theories of American politics. Join us in this concluding segment of a fascinating discussion of the current state of American politics. Thanks for watching.
Say at the outset that I picked issues for the talk where it was very clear that people who associate themselves with the left and people who associate with the right differ within each group and make coalition across. But that isn't true of every issue. Some of the issues of the 14 that I examined, it turns out that while they're appealing to different political philosophies among the 12, the people we would associate with the right stick with the people who are right, and the people on the left stick with one another as well. Though often, since the right and left are each coalitions, then it turns out that they might not have the same reasons as one another, but still the division that we typically associate with the bifurcation applies sometimes. Yes?
Well, this may not be appropriate, but currently in our legislature, there's a lot of difficulty with the two sides working together. And I was wondering, is that part of the 14 philosophies? Is there something maybe more? What's happening?
Well, is stupidity one of the...
No, I think electoral advantages. I think that when one side thinks that it's going to do better in the next election if good things don't happen while they're out of power, then that principle, which is not one of the political philosophies, is more powerful, has more powerful influence on what people do. So, it was very clear, for example, that the Republicans, announced that they really didn't want good things to happen on Obama's watch. So they were going to obstruct as much as they could. And then that's why the House passed a budget that contractarians would hate. Gave more money to rich people. But then it didn't include any money to keep the interest rates low on student loans. That's the issue du jour, right? So then they switched positions because they realized, well, things can't go that badly on Obama's watch because we could be blamed for something like this, and so they switched on that when the light was put on.
So that's kind of an overlay of all of the philosophy.
Well, yeah, it means that if the public perceives the politics as a dichotomy, then you can get people to your side by getting people to perceive that the other side is unhelpful. To the extent that they don't perceive it as a dichotomy, that strategy wouldn't work so well. But since we have winner-take-all elections, whether it's for your congressman, your senator, the president, we don't, unlike, say, in Britain, where you'll have, or generally speaking, in parliamentary systems, you'll have party lists, and you don't necessarily have a winner-take-all in a given constituency, at least in some parliamentary systems. Where you have winner-take-all, there's a tendency to have only two parties, and then to think of things in a dichotomous way.
So along this line, would you say that at the moment we're suffering from people who are specifically trying to keep this argument going, or that we just don't happen to have in power people who are good at noticing what position the two sides might share and not promoting that? So that in the past we've had some people who have been very good at crossing across between red and blue. And is it just that those people are missing at the moment?
Well, I think that those people certainly are thin on the ground compared to the past. And the reasons often given for this are partly that the media outlets are much more diverse now. Diversity can be a good thing, but this enables people to listen repeatedly and exclusively to something that is in an ever narrower range of concerns, so that they fail to see the commonality that they might have with somebody else, or fail to see the point of view that somebody else's point of view actually appeals to a value that they like, but don't give quite as much priority to in this situation. But if you just listen to this narrow range of things, then, if there were, just imagine if there were the Environmental Disaster Network, and so all you listened to was all, then you wouldn't want anything to be done, and it's similar, so if you listen to the free enterprise will save us, and government is wasting money, whatever they do with it, network, then you don't hear, then you don't think, that bridge that I passed getting here, I felt confident. Who inspected that bridge? Probably somebody, from the government. But, that's not in your mind. So I think part of the reason for people's narrower views and therefore greater vitriol, lack of coming together, is that. Not that these people are too unintelligent. Certainly, I think they're bright people on all sides. And by the way, in my view, they're not only are they bright people on all sides, but for the most part, public-spirited. I mean, almost universally, public-spirited people on all sides. I mean, obviously, there's Blagojevich, he's an outlier. But Speaker Boehner really wants what's good for the country. He just thinks that having a Republican White House is necessary to do what's good for the country.
One of the things that I see happening a lot these days is this strategy, do what we can to make the other party look bad. There is a lot more of that negative type of strategizing than what can we do that would be good for the country or good for even our party, our half of the constituency or whatever. It's what can we do that will thwart them or make them, whoever that is, look bad.
And one of the reasons why it's easier to do, and perhaps this is also a reason for the bifurcation being stronger now than it was, is that the American public has not been educated politically to recognize that the benefits possible have something to do with the contributions made. When I lived in Aberdeen, one of my daughters was in 7th grade, and she was going to the local school. And I was asking her, what did you learn today? And I can't remember what the specifics were, but it was very clear. She didn't know what they were getting at, but I could see what they were getting at was that society, and therefore any political unit, is a unit of sharing. And that's what a 7th grader was learning in Scotland then. We don't have such units in our educational thing that politics is inherently sharing. So we think of, and George Will, who's a very bright guy, and I think has lots of insightful things to say about lots of issues. When it comes to economics, he really seems to think that if the government takes money, it disappears. His equations don't match. He thinks that do they burn it? Do they shoot it down in space? Nothing comes of that money. So when he's talking about the demand that would be created in the economy with lower taxes, he doesn't think, well, the higher taxes, the government's going to spend that money too. Somebody's going to be employed that way too. And so that's that blind spot that something's coming from the government is reinforced by our educational system. And we all are thinking in private contexts that, well, it'd be nice to pay less and get more, a deal, and or specials, and cut out the middleman, and the more efficient provider will give us what we want for less. With that mindset, then we think, well, surely there is a way that the government can take in less money, I pay less in tax, and still have all the benefits. So the problem is that it's so easy to make the other side look bad. If the taxes are low and the benefit isn't there, then you can blame them for the lack of benefit. On the other hand, if the benefit is there because there are taxes, then you can blame them because the taxes are too high. And my side would lower the taxes. So it's always easy to offload the problem on the other side because Americans aren't realistic.
I can't remember the bill that was passed last week. I'm memory impaired anymore, but there was something that passed in the House, and they knew when they were passing it, it would fail in the Senate. But the idea was, you know, it was all about the election ploy. We can say we did this and they did nothing or whatever. And that's, once again, it's that negative.
Well, you know, the parties have party platforms, which they will have in the conventions. But in a way, this is a kind of party platform. You're saying, since the Senate's one party, the House another, the House can say, here's what we stand for as a party, and legitimately, that's a way of advertising to the public what they would be voting for if they vote for Republicans, and the Democrats the same. So it's a way of
advertising it in a way to build any coalition.
No. Well, since it's a two-party system predominantly, it's not too unreasonable to point out the differences between your party and the other party in an election year. Unfortunately, every other year is an election year. Yes.
I just finished reading a book by Chris Hedges called American Fascists. And it's about the rise of fundamentalism in the United States. And it was one of the most scary books I think I ever read. I recommend it if you really want to be frightened, read it. And it's a theocracy. That's first on the list here. And the point that Chris, and he's arguing within the tradition, he is a Christian. And his point was that you cannot form a coalition with these people. You cannot deal with them at all because they are so ideologically stuck in one point that it's like talking to a fence post. So it's William Buckley once said, everything that's important has already happened. And that's the conservative point of view, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that the Tea Party that would come into that category?
She said, would the Tea Party come into that category?
Yes,
Yes.
I think so. Yes.
See, I think of them as somewhat different. The Tea Party being more, well, two things, social conservatives and free market conservatives. And they would include some theocrats too, but they're often very interested in having lower taxes. Still, by the way, by people who affiliate with the Tea Party, polls have shown, do not want to give up Medicare. They don't want cuts to Social Security.
Yes.
And in fact, polls were done at the state level, and most people thought that to balance the budgets, we need a combination of tax increases and service cuts. But then when people were asked, which services would you want cut? There was none. None got a majority. And which taxes would you want increased? None got a majority. So they all believe that they should have riots. Yes.
Just another example of groups that share a common concern, I guess, would be that the Tea Party and the 99% both come to the same conclusion. It should say come to different, how to solve the problem. Is they come to, one is to get rid of all the government, the other one is we need more government regulation.
Yes.
But the other one is they've done a study recently where they asked participants they cited people who are both liberal and conservative. And they did MRI scans of their brain while they asked questions, rather loaded questions, you know. And what they found is that different parts of the brain lit up depending on your political persuasion. So the information coming in is being interpreted by your brain totally different than someone from the other party.
Well, we all have a tendency to be biased to pay attention to and remember things that agree with us, confirmation bias. So it could be that if you have a different political point of view, somebody from one other person, it agrees with some other person, so you've got this pleasure thing going. The other person says, I don't know, there's something wrong with that, and that might, that's pure speculation, but that might be one of the...
But if it's true, because I'm just from an anecdotal point of view, we have twins, fraternal twins, 18 years, raised in the same household at the same time. After they left the house, they never talked to each other, right? Because they're so different. So I think there's a lot to the hard wiring,
Yeah,
you know.
could be.
I wanted to ask, you have 12 categories. How did you define those categories? How do subcategories relate? What made 12 a key number? How do you group those together that it says 12 is the best characterization as opposed to 10, as opposed to 20? And how can you subdivide that even further within the categories? How did you do that?
Well, there are, I didn't come at this just inventing it myself. There are other books in political philosophy that have indicated some of these categories. Not 12, fewer, but, and then I thought, well, if the categories are defined by central value concerns, the value of the environment, for example. So I wanted environmentalism to be one. Multiculturalism is one, as well as communitarianism, because for many people, on some issues, the fundamental thing is, we should not only tolerate a variety, but we should learn from a variety. We're enriched by a variety. So besides what I already read of 8 or 10, I came up and at 12 I couldn't think of any more. So that's how I came up. 12. And then as far as subdivisions are concerned, I guess an area that I know better than most other areas, just my limitations, is the environmental area, because I've written that. Now, among environmentalists, there will be some environmentalists who are concerned that the environment, the way we're managing the environment, is going to be harmful to human beings. And other environmentalists would say, well, yeah, that's true and that's important, but it's also important of other species. Even if it were neutral for human beings to destroy a species, we shouldn't destroy a species. Even species whose destruction would not have a material impact on human beings. The Komodo dragon in some remote island where you need to put it to protect it, or some flightless birds in New Zealand. I lived in New Zealand a couple of semesters. And so that would be an example of a division within, because there will be issues that will come up. Or with hunting, among environmentalists, some people say, well, you really should encourage hunting because it gets people involved in the environment, and it gets people to see the relationships, the food relationships that are basic, and we need to get back to basic. Now people say, well, you're killing animals. And so their environmentalism has to do more with preserving all living things, a reverence for life. So that would be a division there. Now, among theocrats, of course, there's a division depending on what your religion is. If you had a proposal, for example, for school vouchers that would be used for religious schools, there are a lot of theocrats who would be very enthusiastic about that if it applied to an area where the vast majority of people were of their religion.
Yes.
But if there were Christians and there were a whole bunch of Muslims who could have their own school, well, as theocrats they'd be the same, but with the religion different, they'd be falling out. So there'd be a couple of examples.
I'm going to ask you to put your mic back on.
Oh, I forgot.
No, it's okay. It's when you turn around, some people can't hear you.
Yeah, of course. There, is that on? Yeah.
Oh,
Great.
much better.
Sorry, I forgot where.
I've noticed in the years that I've been experiencing students that when I first started to teach, when Lincoln was in the White House years ago, that I would come in and I would say to them, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" And they would announce that they were one or the other. And they would also be surprised when I told them what characteristics would make them a Democrat or Republican. And when that discussion was over, they would come to the conclusion that either I was wrong or their parents were wrong, depending on who they were at war with at the time. Now this is what's changed significantly. Now what I do is I simply give them the characteristics. I don't go into the intellectual depth that you do here. I just give them by issues. If you feel this way, if you're pro this or anti this, you're going to be either on the Democratic or Republican side, on the blue or the red side. And then they look at that and they say, wow, I didn't know I was at this or that. They are much firmer in what they believe to be true today than they were 40 years ago. When 40 years ago, they were much firmer in their belief of a particular party. So that when it's all done, I guess I'm making a statement more than a question, when it's all done, they come up with the idea that they're not blue or they're not red, they're purple. Overwhelmingly, for the last 12 to 15 years, all my classes come out to about 70% are pragmatically independent.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of pragmatism is what's infused in the ability to switch, apparently.
Yeah. And, well, if you think of each of the philosophies as highlighting one or two key values that underlie that philosophy, since it's part of the human condition to have to be responsible to many different values which can come into conflict with one another in particular instances or with regard to particular policies, it's not surprising then that people would find themselves ambivalent when asked to choose this or that, because there's just too much involved in this and too much involved in that. You want to choose some from column A and some from column B. So I think that suggests a greater sophistication among the students over the years, that they would greater attention to what's fundamental, namely the values.
Yeah, just to finish up, the saddest part about that is that when it comes time for the election, people in political science are astounded that the undecided vote hangs on so late, that even the day of the election are undecided. I think that's because we're ultimately forced to funnel our decision into one of two major parties, neither of which may satisfy how we get in that morning.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say was, none of those individuals are going to choose to go into politics because they would have to choose to go into the Republican or the Democratic Party, unless they're a Ron Paul, you know.
Yeah.
But the vast majority would choose not to go into politics because they don't fit into either of those two groups, is what I hear you saying.
Right.
Well, but it is possible. By the way, Ron Paul ran for president in 1988 as a libertarian. There's a libertarian party that puts up a candidate most years since 1972. But somebody who could still go into politics who was civic-minded and saying, you know, I want to pick some from column A and some from column B, and I want to convince people that they should do the same in order to make our country better. Now, then they have to choose a party, and it might depend on what each party stands for at that time of choosing, and then it's hard to change, though some people do change. That's why, was it just Jeffers from New England, maybe New Hampshire perhaps, who switched parties, and then you wonder, how did he ever get to be a Republican? Because was it Jeffers, is that his name? Because he's...
His philosophy.
Yeah, that's way. But of course, he became a Republican when Rockefeller was a mainstream Republican. And when Colin Powell said, he was asked about his political affiliation shortly after he retired, he said, "I'm a Rockefeller Republican." Well, he's from New York. Yeah, there's a word for that, Democrat. It was my view.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, they can.
Which,
Okay.
right, because you hadn't had a chance.
Well, I just, one of the things that's really astounded me for the last 8 years or so, since I remember really noticing this in the 2004 election, but when they really latched on to John Kerry being a flip-flopper, and how like that's the worst thing to call somebody, is somebody who changes their mind. And on one hand, I think it's good to be sure of what you believe in and to know where you stand and to be honest about that, but I also think it's important to listen and be willing to change your mind and to be willing to accept the fact that maybe you're not right. Once you gather more data,
Exactly.
that it's okay to be like, oh, maybe I didn't have it right all along. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things right now, is that it's become such a bad thing to be willing to change your mind. And we get on Obama, like, you didn't follow up on your promises. Yeah, but he has so much more information now that he's dealing with, and so much more responsibility, and there's so much more that we can't possibly see from where we sit, that that makes it so that he has to be able to be willing to change his mind.
And people are perhaps less sympathetic with changing mind because they do not often have the personal experience of increased investigation, which would justify a change in mind, because they're listening to the same network they always listen to, and it's just reinforcing what they always believe, so they're not going to change their mind. So they imagine that somebody who does change their mind must be, somehow deficient.